So Francis goes out and he's doing a prayer to the archangels. It's the Feast of the Archangels. And he's doing this prayer on this mountain, okay? And this is in Italy in the 1200s. And what happens is a seraph. And the seraph comes down and it basically has beams or something, like light beams. So then he's hurt by this seraph, right? He has some kind of telepathic communication with it too. And they go back to the monastery and they hide the wounds. They don't want anyone else to see. But you can see the radiation stuff or the light beams or whatever you want to call them. And this imparts upon him the wounds of Christ. Now we could talk about that because it appears that if this is a seraph, there's a tradition here of angel mysticism, of people being contacted by angels and angels imparting knowledge, like the Jacob contact event. And it looks to be very powerful.
The history of our Earth is so different from what we can imagine.
The Smithsonian, that if they found out about a large skeleton somewhere, was to go get it.
I'm going to assume at least one person is right, because if one person's right, it busts the paradigm.
It all goes back to the fallen cherub. And the problem with the modern day church, they have a very truncated view of the supernatural.
This backdrop that's just pregnant with all kinds of meaning associated with this Mount Hermon event.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures.
And this guy defects from the kingdom. That's a big deal.
Welcome back to Blurry Creatures. We're excited today. We have Dr. Diana Pasulka in the studio, in the flesh here, and we did an episode, I think it was in the hundreds, a long time ago.
It was 176. I looked it up the other day because we were talking about having, I was telling Doug Van Dorn, we had a conference recently, and one of our guests I was talking about you coming in and how it's been a crazy year or two for you.
Yes.
Because we initially had you on, we were talking before, a good friend of the show, a friend of mine, Matt Marr, who's a worship artist. He's a Catholic guy. He introduced me to American Cosmic, and that's why I reached out initially to have you on the show, because it's very, it feels like few and far between that someone in the religious space, and you're a PhD of religious studies, you chair the religious studies department at your university, and that speaks and talks about or even contextualizes the UFO phenomena. And you started that, but here, as we were talking before, today, the actual day of recording here, we are the second session of the House Oversight Committee on UAPs is happening actually right now. And the last year's been wild, at least for Blurry Creatures as well, because this has become a much more mainstream topic, at least discussed in the mainstream. I mean, you just recently were on Joe Rogan, which is incredible, and I want to hear about how this last year has been for you. But these things are happening in the biggest forums in culture right now, are having discussions around this, and now our government is also, at least in show, having a discussion around.
Yeah, what do you feel about all that?
Yeah. Okay. So first, wow, congratulations on your own amazing stratospheric success too. What a great studio this is. I love it.
Thank you.
And I remember when we had the first podcast talk, and it was really new for me because I'm an academic. So I started to get a lot of people who wanted to talk to me, and I couldn't talk to everyone, right? So there's so many, like every single day. And so I'd basically just put them in a file, and then kind of sometimes I just couldn't get to them. But Blurry Creatures, Mitch Hedberg, I knew that. And I'm like,
let's
okay,
go. You're one of the few that gets that. That's amazing.
Blurry Creatures. I'm like, I want to talk to these guys because they have a worldview here in their title. And I asked you too. I said, is this the Mitch Hedberg thing? And you're like, yeah. And I said, I'm in. Well, so, and since then, you guys have just gone huge. Like, I just love everything that you're doing. And you stayed true to the epistemology of it. And I love the kind of, well, not the kind of the ufology and Christianity at the same time, because really that's what it's about. And I think that's just really cool. So so happy to be here again.
Yeah, thank you. That's kind of what I want to talk to you about, because I think a lot of times, when you go on shows like this, you have to kind of start from the beginning, and you have
Yeah.
to sort of speak to the skeptics and the Christian skeptics. And we don't have to do that today, because I think a lot of our listeners have been here for the last 4 years and know that there's a lot of data, and this is an ancient phenomena. And also, all the above is true when it comes to UFOs. We don't have to sit here and go, well, it's just a government psyop and the government's just inflating it. Yeah, part of it is that.
Yep.
But also, people have been experiencing these things for a long time, way before Hollywood made it cool, I guess, or interesting, or put it onto the public scene. And so I think it would be good to just kind of pick up where we left off and not have to go through a whole hour of like, let's talk to the skeptics. Because I know that a lot of people who are into the UFO space, you kind of have to start there.
Yeah, you do.
But I don't feel like on our show where we're at, we have they can go back and listen to some other episodes and kind of catch up to where we are. And we say that a lot on the show. All the above, know, like when it comes to anything from like Bigfoot to UFOs, there are stories that are outside of whatever paradigm you have, and you have to scratch your head and go, what is that? So I'd love to see where you are now and talk about the ancient part of it, and the present as well.
Well, that's one thing I was looking for, because we touched on it a bit, because you told us all the stuff we never knew about the Vatican, right? That there was this entire space where they had a wall or a portion of the library is dedicated to now the UFO phenomena, right? And this is because what I think a lot of people will say in our space and in the church as well is that this is a very modern phenomena. It's since Roswell and Hollywood, and I think these things all play into it. But what I like about your work in American Cosmic and now in Encounters is you say, no, this isn't new. This isn't a new thing. In fact,
when did you get to that opinion? When did you start to think?
Yeah, well, it began, obviously, so remember in 2012 is when I started to look into this as something that was happening, because I was finished with a lot of archival work where I had encountered aerial phenomena from European Catholics from 1200 to 1800, so that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And even before that, okay. And I kept this log, but it didn't occur to me that this had anything to do with UFOs. I just thought it was really strange. I included one in my book on the Catholic doctrine of purgatory, a history of that. And so what I did was I showed it to a friend of mine, and he said, this looks like UFOs, Steven Spielberg types of things. And I thought he was wacko, really. Right. And so, but I went to a UFO conference near my town, and I talked to people. And so I started to then rethink how I was looking at these events, what I now call angel contact events from history. And of course, Christianity has a lot of them, right?
Oh, yeah.
So the whole Bible's filled with them, and really, we're kind of programmed.
And you believe those are like UFO contact?
Well, it's okay. So what I think is that whatever we want to call that, it's the same thing that we're seeing now.
Okay.
So and that recognition happened to me probably in late 2012, and why did it happen? Because I had primary source material from the Catholic tradition, which is the Christian tradition, and this was the actual events where people were having contact events, and I saw that what was happening didn't look like how they were being represented. So they were being represented. So if you go back to the Bible and you actually read about the angel events, like Jacob wrestling with the angel and so forth, it's pretty intense. Right. Like, we're talking about a high stakes interaction here that scares people. And with Jacob, he actually got a blessing. He fought this thing all night and got a blessing from it the next day. So so I was like, I had to say that I actually was woken up to my own religion. And I was a Christian before, but I became like a super believer after that.
Cool.
I was like, okay, this stuff is more real than I actually thought, because we've been kind of lulled into not actually acknowledging that these are real things, and they're still with us and they're still around. Yeah. And people have these experiences. So that's when I woke up.
Like, well, it's hard for us because we talked a lot of exorcists and trying to get to the, and I think if you have a highly focused, specialized field, sometimes you have a hard time, including all this other stuff.
Right.
And I think on our show, it's a one-stop shop for anything weird and strange, right? And we talk a lot about creatures specifically, and aliens and all that other stuff is obviously in that camp. But a lot of people who deal with this stuff, spiritual things, and are believers of spiritual things, are also sometimes very myopic and like, oh no, this is a modern phenomenon. You're like, well, we've talked to people who say this stuff goes all the way back, and you've had UFO sightings, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So what is that? Is that true or is it false? People making that up? They didn't even have a context to even say what it was.
And they describe it almost exactly.
Yeah.
So that's
I
the
would
thing.
love to talk about that.
Yeah, there's a pattern match.
Those ideas and and what you found in the text, that because obviously not a lot of people have access to ancient text. Like we just don't have. I mean, we can look it up on the internet and we can look on like old newspaper articles, but the average person just can't go waltz into the Vatican and read things.
Well, and the Church of Rome was collecting. I mean, obviously was archiving, if you will, right? This was the archival system at that point. There was there weren't governments that were saving this stuff. It had to do directly with Christendom, and what are I know you've talked about it in terms of like ascent narratives, right? You have these these events that are recorded and written down. What are some of these that to you it's written as maybe something miraculous, or in the Catholic tradition there's it's a saint and they have some sort of experience, but when you read it through the lens of today, you see what we would call like a UFO or experience or
okay,
encounter.
so we're the pattern matches.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
That the ones that kind of blew my mind at the time, in that time period, 2013 or so, were ones that Catholics especially are, and even regular Christians who are not Catholic, they all know these saints. Okay, so one of them is Francis of Assisi.
Assisi, yeah.
Now, Francis of Assisi is like super well known because if you go to anybody's garden, sometimes they'll have a statue and he has the animals around him and the birds on his shoulder and such. So that's Francis of Assisi.
He was like an original Steve Irwin, right? He had all the animals.
That's right. Yeah, he
R.I.P.
was.
Steve,
He was.
but
He spoke to the animals.
Yeah.
So the thing about this is that you do have to access these archives, and why? Because even back in that time period, when a person had one of these experiences, and I'll go specifically into what happened to him.
Yeah.
And again, no offense, okay, to people who are, have their St. Francis card, and I'm just telling you what these documents say, and then my interpretation. Okay, so Francis, he is a devout person, right? So he has an inclination to know God. Okay, so people are born that have that inclination, and so this leads him to become a monk. And first let me finish talking about the accessing of these documents.
Sure.
So in the United States, there's an archive in Philadelphia, which is it's a Catholic archive, and it has so much information that's primary source information. It goes back to the Aztecs.
Wow.
Yeah, so they have like stone records of like Aztec.
Do you have to be an academic to get access?
I think you do,
Okay.
but maybe not.
Is it hidden
I'm not
behind
sure.
Mount
We're
Rushmore?
getting close.
Is that the place Nick
closer,
Cage
Luke.
went? Is that when Nick Cage went like behind Mount Rushmore with a repository?
Of course, there's a Nick Cage movie reference.
Right,
But
You have to be an academic. What about Nick Cage? Can he get...
How did he get in?
I know. Well, I don't actually know. I know at the Vatican you do have to be, it's not necessarily an academic, but you have to have credentials that,
Sure.
that
Can't
you've
just be
been
anybody.
studying. Yeah. It can't just be anyone who gets in. But it might be at the Philly archive. I'm not sure, but I'll look into it. But it's just an incredible, I had, a lot of the stuff is not digitized.
Right.
So you wouldn't know.
Yeah.
You have to actually be a nice person who's nice to the archivist, because if you walk in there and you're like, I want to see these digitized things, which I did because I had seen them online, and I was like, I want to see these things. And then after day one, the archivist took a liking to me, and he's like, do you want to see some really cool stuff? And I'm like, yes, I do. And so, we went down into the earth, like 6 stories. They have stuff 6 stories down. And I was kind of afraid, in this rickety elevator. And we get down there and we see things, among them stones of Aztec sacrifices, like where you can actually see. And I had a student with me who's now actually a professor. And I was like thinking, am I going to trigger her, that, because these are like really bad. These are bad images, right?
Yeah.
But that's where I learned a lot of this stuff. Okay. So you see the primary source documents of a lot of those people who have these experiences actually don't write them down. One person did, and that's Teresa of Avila, and I could talk about her too. But so Francis goes out and he's doing a prayer to the archangels. It's the Feast of the Archangels. And he's he's doing this prayer on this mountain, okay, and this is in Italy in the 1200s. And what happens is a seraph comes down. Well, I call it a seraph. That's because that's what he called it, okay, and it looks like a seraph.
Who saw the seraph? New song coming out.
Who saw the seraph? That's cool.
Some Rob Marley. Yeah.
He did. He saw the seraph. Anyway, keep going. Bad joke.
No, that's all right. I get that joke.
Sometimes.
But do you know what you're looking for at this moment or no?
No.
You don't know what you're looking for?
No. I'm just,
okay.
I'm doing an examination of these documents because I want to know, okay, wait a minute, something weird is happening and I would like to know, but I need a lot of data. So you can't just go off one or two documents. You need like hundreds of documents to say, this is the pattern match, right? Yeah. So, and this is one of the big ones, and you can't just say that because Catholics will get upset at you. You know, you can't just say
he's a big one. Yeah,
yeah. So, so anyway, so he doesn't write anything, but this is written about him afterwards, and so you have several different documents. From
interesting,
and they all say they all say the same thing, but in different ways, and they're all like in Latin and stuff like that, inaccessible types of things, right? Yeah. He does actually write something to one of his friends, who's a younger monk named Leo, Brother Leo. He writes something very important that I think says something about this event. But this is what happens to him. So he's at this event. Most likely, Brother Leo's with him. Some sources don't say that, but a lot of sources do, and I believe that Brother Leo is most likely with him. But here is Francis, and he's praying, and the seraph comes down, and it basically has beams or something, like light beams. And we could talk about this in terms of Gary Nolan's work too, because I work with Gary Nolan.
Okay, definitely do that. Yeah.
So then he's hurt by this seraph, right? He has some kind of telepathic communication with it too.
Really?
Yeah. So there's a telepathic communication. I don't know if it intentionally hurts him, to tell you the truth. And this is something we could talk about with respect to Gary Nolan's work. He has this question. He doesn't think it's intentional. Okay, so this being then interacts with Francis. Francis is wounded, okay? And they go back to the monastery and they hide the wounds. They don't want anyone else to see what has happened to Francis. So it is called the stigmata, right? The wounds of Christ. And we talk about the stigma associated with phenomena today. That's where I think it starts there.
So there's no digital copy of this story anywhere.
There are.
Okay.
Yeah.
But this is but you're looking at the source materials. You're not taking a copy. You're looking at the actual.
I'm looking at the actual.
Yeah.
The thing is that I gave a talk on this in New York City like a year and a half ago, I think, and I knew that people would want to know the sources. So I created a bibliography. And I have a feeling your viewers are the same. Like they're going to want to see all this stuff, and I'm happy to provide it. Awesome. So the thing about my field is it's transparent.
Right.
Like if we have sources, we're not like the people in the special access programs who can't share anything.
Right.
We do. That's what we do.
And you're as an academic, you do peer-reviewed work
we
too.
Do.
So it's all very much like...
Yeah, and Dr. Michael Heiser got us into this, and it started, basically was the academic that helped this show get started.
Wow.
And
you're lucky.
And he came on a couple times in the early days, but he would do the same thing. And there's a lot of people taking shots at him now that he's even passed, but then I realized that all of his work was peer reviewed.
And it's cited, and it's all.
You can't publish anything. No. I've published with Oxford.
That's what I love about this, though,
because
I think in this space there's so much conjecture, and everybody has an opinion because, of course, it's a phenomena, right? But we always try to go back to what does the data say, and that's why I love the empirical work. Your work is empirical. It's part of the scientific method, and you're also compiling and citing these sources.
Well, it's cool because like John Mack and you and we need these academics to kind of push this subject into the mainstream because nobody's going to take anybody else serious. If you're like, oh, fire in the sky, I'm just this guy that got abducted by this UFO. Everyone's like, you're just some guy and lives in a trailer, and then we write it off. But we really do need the academics to help make it, hey, this is happening. Here's the data. So I appreciate that. So you were talking about John Mack. So
Cece has the stigmata, as you say, and this is where you think the stigma, if you will, comes from when it comes to this. But what happens to him?
He gets back.
Yeah. So sadly, he ends up passing away. right? And it's pretty serious.
From the event?
We don't actually know. I
Okay.
can't say for sure. My opinion is that probably, because it looked like he was so wounded that they didn't want to show his wounds to anybody.
How do you think he was wounded? Like shot at or just like
no, it
in
looks like
prison?
it looks like some type of radiation or some kind of light.
This is the Gary Nolan.
Yeah. So when you see those images of, by the way, even when you see the representations and paintings of Francis of Assisi, and hopefully I'll send some for your viewers, but it would be great if we had them up here, you know. So there's a
throw
whole,
them on the screen?
There's a whole lineage. Yeah, you could show some of them. It's the stigmata.
Is this connected? You know that Phil Schneider story when he goes down in the underground base and he gets shot up and he gets cancer right after that?
Yeah, it's very similar.
Okay.
So when I started to do my research, so in about 2014, 2015, aerospace people, well, even before that, but a lot of people who were associated with aerospace companies and corporations started to ask me for my research and data.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was weird.
That felt kind of odd. Yeah.
I thought it was weird. I was like, okay, I'm just a academic doing this work that nobody, you know, we all think it's interesting, but nobody else
and
does.
that's when you're starting to shift and see this?
Yeah, that's when they started to, I began to speak with them. And I recognized that they were looking at it like they asked me questions. What kind of light did they report? What was the color of it? Where was this? You know, they were looking at longitude, latitude, hotspot type things. And they said, were any of the people damaged or hurt? Like, were there any injuries? And I was thinking, yeah, there are injuries. And so, so there's a whole history of that too, of that image. It changes over time. So in this one, this is probably an early one. I don't know if you can see Brother Leo in there, but usually you see Brother Leo in there. Brother Leo might be
right behind him.
Yeah, I think so, right up the top there. But see how they're portraying this as the seraph. He said that an eye came out to look at him, or at least Brother Leo said that because he presumably witnesses this.
Okay, so there's two guys there?
Yeah, there's two guys there. And Brother Leo's usually in the shadows somewhere witnessing this. But, and it's not necessarily the case that Jesus is there. So he's not sure. He sees an eye, but that later gets interpreted to be Jesus. Okay?
Interesting.
So they're not, so that's what I'm saying is that there are different ways of interpreting. There's one with Brother Leo. That's a later version of that representation. But you can see the radiation stuff or the light beams or whatever you want to call them. And this imparts upon him the wounds of Christ. Now, we could talk about that because it appears that if this is a seraph, there's a tradition here of angel mysticism, of people being contacted by angels and angels imparting knowledge, like the Jacob contact event. Yeah. And it looks to be very powerful, powerful.
There's a lot of skeptics who think that sometimes those can be nefarious. Do you see any signs?
In many cases, I think that they are. So right now, I am now telling people, and by the way, this doesn't reflect my university's position. So my university doesn't have qualifier. My university doesn't have anything to say about angel events and things like that. They're okay with me doing this. Very happy.
You can put it all on Blurry. It's fine. We'll take it.
Well, what's interesting about that, in addition to the sort of this situation where you have an injury or you have this UFO or angel injury, is what you were just talking about as well. Is like, we talk a lot about Genesis 6 in our show, where you have the Watchers, the rebellious angels, that they show up, and what do? They impart knowledge. They trade knowledge for wives.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
the angels themselves don't feel dangerous. It could be the technology that they're moving around in, because there's also these stories where a UFO will land in some farmer's property, nothing grows around that area. So could the craft that maybe they're rolling in on be the thing that hurts people? Yeah,
this is something that people are trying to figure out as well. So I do want to say this. There's this congressional hearing right now.
Yeah.
The work that's being done, that's the actual work to move this forward, is not in the congressional hearing. I mean, that's helpful, and I love it that it's happening, because before we walked into the studio, I heard Lou Elizondo talk about people being harassed for doing this work. And I'm one of those people. And so I'm happy that this is happening, even if it's not super deep, what's going on in Congress. I don't care. I'm happy that he's coming out and saying, this is, people are doing this. And because the people who do have knowledge about it, and by the way, it looks, now that I've written American Cosmic and it's been a few years and the whole thing is happening, I basically wrote about one of those unacknowledged SAPs, special access programs. And so in a sense, I'm one of those people who know. So if they want the whistleblowers, thank goodness they're not asking me. But if they want to know about it, it's in that book.
This is what, so we have a unique opportunity then with you sitting here. We don't know what's happening at the moment as far as what's going on in the hearing, but we do. The last one, we know what happened, right? So your experiences we talked about with Tyler last time on the show, right?
Yeah.
He's to refresh on our last episode. He's a Space Force. If am I correct here?
Yes.
He's a Space Force, also an astrophysicist or an aerospace engineer. I don't remember which one it is, but he takes you places and shows you some things that exist. So having that and having seen things and knowing folks on the inside, what are your thoughts about the initial stuff that came out? Like, do you think David Grush is telling the truth about what potentially these factions, unregulated factions as it would be of our government, perhaps have? Because they said a lot of things. It's recovered craft, which I know you went to a crash site, right?
I'll talk about that.
And also they talk about non-human biologics, which is a very interesting revelation. Does all of that jive with the stuff that you have?
It feels like a very massaged press release.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I don't know exactly what's happening. I'll just say that, except that I do know that right now, directly after American Cosmic was published, you talked to me a little bit as that was happening. A lot happened. Okay. Sure. Part of what happened was that I got to meet I met all the people in the Invisible College. In fact, I think that they consider me a part of it. So even though I don't consider myself,
because we didn't get into this, and this is something I was going to ask you that you touched on with Joe Rogan, but he never strung this out, and it was fascinating to me. Like, you have the Invisible College, and then you have what you called this pencils up, this oral tradition of a UFO narrative that exists that isn't written down. Can you talk about that for a bit, and we can maybe pull a few of those strings, because I feel like Joe moved on quickly, and I was like, what is this?
Yeah. It's okay, because, the thing is that it sounds so weird that I have said no to, I know, I have said no to some of the, like, you would know their names, like Joe Rogan and blah, 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 because I don't want to say it publicly, because it's that weird. But I said it yesterday on Sean Ryan, and I'm going to say it here. Okay, so there's a level to what's happening that's I would call it a non-human level. I would call it, like, when people talk about what is spiritual warfare and that type of thing, it's indicative to me that something like that is happening. So when we're talking about this pencils up tradition, first off, there's now talk about this unacknowledged special access program called Immaculate Conception. Okay. I promise you that's not what it's called. And also they will change the name. So it'll be changed, and it'll be numbers, or else it'll be something that is passed along orally. There's an oral tradition. This thing that gets imparted to Francis is knowledge, but it also could be something that's transmitted to his monks and then gets transmitted over time.
Telepathically.
Yeah, or
or just like orally, like it's like pre-written history, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have the Bible's passed down orally until it's written down, presumably by Moses.
That's right.
Right, but you have these.
Well, a lot of people contend on our show that's how all the biblical writers really got the kind of being told these things.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Because how does it all match and flow and over centuries in time? And it's like this book supports this book and so on. It's like a living document. And the only way
that's right.
I just don't think human beings could be as involved with that process as we probably would think if we were just rational, like the rational discussion. Oh yeah, they wrote this book down. But it seems like there's something entirely different happening with scripture. And you see Jordan Peterson on talking about all this all the time, because he's I don't know where his faith is, but he's mesmerized by the Bible itself. And I think that's because there were higher entities involved in communicating the message to us. But that's just my take.
Yeah, I personally feel that. So
Okay.
this is nothing I could do peer review. Like
Yeah.
you can't,
Yeah.
you know, oh, that oral tradition that's unacknowledged. Let's peer review that. You can't do that.
What is it then? Is this? It feels like esoteric secret knowledge, right? That's kind of how it feels like. Oh, we've got this meta narrative that's the truth that is not being written down, but it's being passed from. Is this what the Invisible College is? These people who kind of hold this knowledge about what's really happening? Is that?
Well, okay. So the Invisible College is filled with scientists who've been working on UFOs for more than 40 years. Okay, so they're all like in their 70s and 80s now.
Right.
And when is Jacques Vallée? How put
Since
off
the great age of the 80s? Since then? Yeah.
the great age.
True.
All the way back to the 80s.
Looks a lot like this in some ways. Yeah.
Even in the 50s, some of them have been working on it since the 50s. So you know, Alan Hynek.
We don't know that decade here. We don't.
Oh yeah,
So
I agree.
it's Roswell. So you have this sort of the modern.
That's right.
American.
So there's this lineage. Now the thing about them is that, and excuse me if they hear this, I'm sorry. They're not part of the special access.
It's good they're
programs.
invisible,
They're
so they won't know.
They're on the academic side. So they're not like they're not top secret clearance.
No, they may be even, but they're not. I know from interacting with them that they don't know what Tyler knows, and it doesn't seem like they'll be able to. They're surprised even when they hear.
Do you feel like there's like just several different factions all realizing they can't bottle this up anymore and everyone wants to get in control who gets to break the story?
I think that's going on. Yeah, I think right now that part of the government is basically trying to manage the situation, but there's part of the government, they're not even in alignment with each other.
Yeah.
And so I've been in the crossfire of that.
And then you said
know?
There's angelic who are also part of the disclosure?
I mean, honestly, I think that we're in a space where good things are happening on that front. And it seems like there's a lot of pushback to that. And for people who want to know the truth, right, there's pushback to those people. And that's unfortunate. But that has always been the case, by the way. You know, if you look at the truth tellers, you know, it's not been great for them really in the end, you know, but they do it anyway, right? And I think maybe we're at a place where it might be okay, you know, to say the truth now.
Yeah, I mean,
what are some of the bigger parts of this oral narrative? Is it have to do with recovery or
there's a
donation? The donation of these?
So so if you look again now, I even look at my own book because now I'm thinking because I just documented it. I think I told you all at the time that it was like mad furious rush just to document what I was experiencing, and now when I go back and reread it, I can't believe what I wrote because I say, okay, now that's true. That came true. And this is what he was talking about. And so what you were asking me, what is it about? Well, it's important to know that this is a person who was in the Space Force and, you know, part of the space shuttle program for its duration and very patriotic, you know, and then, you know, part of most likely looks like a crash retrieval program took me to a site, right? I work with Gary. He and Gary worked for a while together. And then what happened was he converted to hardcore Christianity. After seeing those documents, those primary source documents that I showed him, he then recognized what he was doing and who he was interacting with. And he became just like I did. So in a sense, that book reveals my conversion and his conversion, even though I was already Christian. You know, I was like, wow, it's real more than I thought it was. Like, even though I believed it.
Right.
Well, yeah, we were talking about that yesterday. Like Moses had a magical staff. You know that. You grow up like coloring those things and like, you know, the children's department at the church. And then something happens in us where we get older and we just like don't believe it as much or at all.
No, we don't.
But we still believe in God, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And it's such a strange thing that happens. And then you see a UFO or you see Bigfoot or you see something you shouldn't see. And then all of a sudden you go, wait a minute. Like you just become awake to the fact that this is all spiritual.
Yeah.
Everything happening is spiritual. And that's another part of this conversation that I wanted to talk. I don't know if you were done with this or not, but where the physical meets the spiritual, because that's the most confusing part of all this, is because you have a lot of Christians like, oh, it's just demons, it's just spirits, it's just deceptions. So you're like, but you went and like,
well, yeah, we have an exorcist came on the show and said it's just a manifestation. UFO is just a manifestation.
but we have craft, we have nuts and bolts.
And
you know, what is that?
Talk about holding and touching these materials. And Gary Nolan is collecting. I want to see his collection. He's collecting these things to analyze them, right?
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
Like we talked about, like one of our bigger episodes was a Mormon missionary where he befriends a government trapper, you know, in Roswell, New Mexico, and he found a piece of this craft, and he had it in his with all of his you know, his
bear traps and everything else, and
he shows these Mormon missionaries, you know, and like, hey, check this out, and there's markings on it, like ancient markings, like weird languages, and they try to even just put a little dent in it, and they can't. And take that story for what it is, but it's all documented in like the 70s, and he sent these letters back to his parents. And then his son finds them and then listens to our show and goes, whoa, why is this involved in my dad's like Mormon missionary stories, writing to my parents? He just happens to. But there's like, that's a long story, but there are pieces of wreckage. Like how often do you hear, you know, spiritual stories that just are around, the evidence is there, you could go, and it doesn't happen, right? Like demons aren't building things. So we have to like figure out what that is. How does the spiritual and the physical collide?
So, okay. Now, I know this sounds odd, but this is what my purgatory book was about, because I start off with a way too long introduction, by the way. So if anybody reads that book, you can skip the introduction unless you're interested in Vatican II, okay? All right. Which I'm sure you probably aren't. But it is interesting for Catholics. So I start off by talking about this cave that people would go into in 1200, even before that. So for hundreds of years, they're Christian, they're Irish. And this is like 700, 800, 900, right? So a long time ago. And they would go into this cave to basically go through the afterlife. So the afterlife wasn't something that you just experienced when you were dead, right? So my question was in that book, how did purgatory become something that was supernatural and non-material? Because back in the day when people thought of purgatory, it was actually a place, and it was a thing that people experienced, and they met demons and they fought them and things like that. So
like they went to the underworld somehow.
Yeah, they just went through a cave door and they were there.
Like the gates of hell at Mount Hermon.
That is the gates of hell.
It's a real cave. They believed was the entrance to the underworld.
So you think it was actually like you go into the cave, you know, and you go down, but you're still alive?
Oh, no. So if you survive it, then your sins are forgiven. That was their version of purgatory. So the important point is that during the late modern or the early modern period, there was a shift toward the belief that angels and demons and spiritual things were non-material. Well, why? That was my question in the purgatory book. And we inherited that culture. That there's a dichotomy between spirit and matter. Now, this is something that I hear exorcists say, not all of them, but a lot of them say, well, angels and demons are non-material. They're non-material. Well, okay, wait a minute. If you go back to the Bible, there are very real effects of these non-material.
Let's go. Yeah, they eat.
Yeah, that's
they
right.
wrestle.
Yeah, exactly.
They walk into Sodom.
They dislocate Jacob's.
Well, are you talking demons or are you talking angels?
We're talking about angels here.
Yeah.
Demons,
both of
by
them,
definition, are disembodied spirits.
But that's
so they have this capability to do that.
Sure. Right.
And so when we've inherited that worldview. So to us, nothing exists other than what we like. That's how we lose our faith,
ethereal,
right? When we say we have our faith, we abstractly believe in God. You know, even when we're Christian, like Colonel Carnell, I posted a quote from him on I think it was in Instagram the other day, where he basically does this talk, and he says that people are now going to have to confront the fact that what they believe, their religious belief, like of angels and so forth, he said, is actually real, and that's going to be difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of just like we're on both sides of this coin, because you have the Bigfoot scientists who are trying to say this is an animal, right? Bigfoot is just an animal. There's nothing woo going on with, and then you have Christians say it's just spiritual deception. It's not actually physical either. So you have these two camps that acknowledge that Bigfoot's a thing, but they don't agree on what it is. And then you hear people come on our show and say, it does both those things. It leaves footprints and it disappears. And you're like, wait, how does that happen? How does that work? And so you can't stay in one side for very long, or you just have to deny all these stories and all these encounters and all these experiences. And I think that you're trying to do that to the angelic world and say, maybe they build craft, maybe they arrive on craft, maybe they're a part of these things flying around. And a lot of people hate Luke and I for saying that, it's in some of our imagery. It's obviously in the intro to the show. We show that on Mount Hermon where these angels show up. How do they get there? Do they just pop into existence, or do they have to come from point A to get to point B? I think they more likely had to travel somehow and get here. And that's how they move around. And that's what we're seeing since the dawn of time. But it's hard because we don't know which are the good ones, which ones are the bad ones, and what are they doing and why.
To that note, Danny, can we circle back to St. Francis? Because we were talking about his injuries, and you were saying that what you read seemed like radiation.
Last time I spoke with Gary about it, he didn't believe that it was intentional. He thought it was like collateral damage from being close to. But so he was doing this work in at least 2017. Maybe probably 2015, I'm thinking. Right. But he had a lot of data and shared it with me when we were in New Mexico going to that site. And so that's what clued me in. And even earlier with people asking me, the aerospace engineers, are there injuries involved with these angel events, And well, yeah, I hadn't thought about that, honestly, because we're just sadly trained to see angel events in a certain way, right? So many images show us what angels look like.
Wrestling, right?
Exactly.
Is that what was happening?
We see most people don't read the Bible, so you don't get those stories, right? And so they're not passed on, they're not talked about in church, but Well,
it took you a long time to know what you were looking for, as well as anybody else in these spaces.
Yeah.
Or it's almost as if God chooses you for this path and this journey, because it takes a kind of skeptical mind but open mind at the same time, and usually human beings are on kind of one side of these things, but
an academic too, so there's a method, it's methodical, right? You're creating a case.
Yes.
So in the case of
you can also just dismiss things or put them into an entirely different category, like the sons of God in Genesis 6 aren't angels, they're just a race of humans, move on. And then you have all these other academics who are like, no, the language doesn't say that. These are this is not human beings and even the language says, took the daughters of men. I think we as humans can create categories because we're afraid of what that means. I mean, there's angels and humans hanging out. How is that possible?
Exactly. Yeah. So there are unanswered questions. And as we go on with what's happening with the official disclosure going on, right? Sure. It's really interesting to look back on the questions that we have unanswered. Yeah. And so I think that's why, honestly, it's so strange for me, because I did that research not knowing what a crash retrieval program was, not having that language, not even believing in UFOs. So I did it fresh from the perspective of a scholar of religion. Yeah. And then becoming shocked, right? And then but I keep going. There were times when I didn't want to continue, by the way.
Yeah, I can imagine. Same with us. It's like, you're just kicking so many things around that we have the Mormons listening, the flat earthers listening, the Catholics listening, the Christians listening, and they all get mad at us for different reasons. Yeah. And they're very vocal about certain things. Yeah. I'm sure you've had a lot of conversations with exorcists about these things.
I have.
And how does that go?
Well, I had one, and these are amazing people. Yeah, okay, because devoting your life to doing that is pretty hardcore. I think we can all agree on that. So one of them suggested that I get out of this work because of the spiritual danger. Really? So around 2020, I had been giving all kinds of talks. Like if a person asked me to go talk at their university or whatnot, or their church or whatnot, I'd do it. And there would be mediums in the audience, people who
Really?
Yes. And I would think, okay, that's an interesting choice of career. However, they would then say, and that person in your slide, like of a government agent or whatnot, that person's my boss. And so this type of thing would keep happening to me to the point where I knew that I was being targeted. And this was something that was not cool with me, because what do mediums do? They get access to information that they have in a weird way, right? In a way that's not conventional. Like we're talking here, it's not through talking.
Yeah.
And so I recognized then, so the exorcist said, these things are going to happen to you, and people will give you things. People give you things, and you have to get those, you have to get rid of those, give them to a priest that can get rid of them, basically.
So we're talking about witchcraft. I mean, literally that's a medium. It's like the medium, the Witch of Endor, right? You're really just talking about a witch it's just vernacular, right? You have
like hexed items, cursed items, and things like that. So again, I got a lot of things, and so I had never thought about it from that point of view.
Yeah.
And
Not
then
Taco Bell cups, though. So we give you one of those.
I
those
would
are
not.
blessed. They were filled with holy water before they.
It's something that academics don't want to talk about because and I don't blame them, frankly. It is just very outside of our comfort zone, and also weird for them.
Well, it takes a long time. It took me, about a decade to kind of connect Bigfoot to these things. Mm-hmm. You start out there, and then it was David Paulides in Missing 411, the data of people going missing where every single explanation was finally off the table. People are going from our world to somewhere else. And you have to go, okay, UFOs are real, and these abductions or portals or something is real. It's not an animal. It's not a bear. It's not Bigfoot. It's not the Wendigo. It's something unexplainable is happening. And so the UFO abduction phenomenon starts to come into the conversation. Year 8, 9 into researching these topics, where you're already open-minded, you're already down that road, and you go, okay, now I have room for this. And I'm not skeptical. I don't know what I believe about it. Let's just hear the data. Let's hear the stories. And I think guys like John Mack were like having all these people telling the same story over and over again. You have to be like, either I'm not going to listen to people and say they're all nuts, or this is happening.
Well, he did a psychiatric analysis on those people, and he found that in every way they were normal, except for that one thing. They're them saying, well, I was abducted by aliens, right? And he was like, sorry, but these are completely normal people.
And I think that's why you need shows like this and people like you to kind of push this on the mainstream. And I think that for some reason, a lot of Christians are afraid of these topics, these conversations.
Yeah.
Or very quick to say, it's demons. Don't talk about it anymore. That's it. It's done.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's not what the data says. And I think that's why we started here in this conversation. We've moved past that over the years. And if you're still there, stay with us, hopefully. But there's more data, and I'd love to talk about that, where your mind starts to go, okay, you're at a crash retrieval. You're looking at the pieces. You're touching stuff. What's going through your mind then in terms of your faith?
Yeah. So Tyler, this person, enigmatic person who is affiliated with all these government institutions, has the clearances. And so he takes Gary Nolan and I. Gary is a professor at Stanford, a scientist. And we go to this. And by the way, I invited Gary because I didn't want to go by myself. So we go to this place.
You don't want to be blindfolded and take somewhere by yourself?
No, I did not.
Yeah, that's probably a smart move.
We had to be blindfolded. It's a secret place. So it's in New Mexico. It was a crash site from apparently one of the ones in the 1940s, not Roswell. And so at that point, I'm not believing. I'm not believing that it's real. I think that maybe it's a setup. Maybe they're trying to plant disinformation. Gary's on my side. Yeah. We're both academics, and so we both kind of talk to each other as the day goes on, and we do find debris. We're like, is this a setup for us? And Gary's like, well, I'm the one who's going to assess these materials, and we'll find out. Right. And I was like, yeah. So anyway, so we got the stuff, and it looks like metallic frog skin. So everybody asked me, what does it look like? So it looks like metallic frog skin. And Gary's going to take
big pieces, small pieces?
Big and small pieces we found. Really? And it wasn't easy to find, by the way. It was underneath rubble and buried, like really deep. And the rubble, by the way, this is why I'm really grateful to my then self for taking good notes, you know, because the rubble was important because I didn't understand it. Tyler told me that it was disintegrated cans, aluminum cans from the 1950s. After they excavated the craft, they didn't want anybody else out there looking for this stuff. But my editor of the book is my Oxford editor. So she said, "This is weird, Diana. You can't put this in there. Like, why would there be rubble out in the middle of the desert?" You know, and I said, "Well, you're right. It is weird, but we have to keep it in there because we don't know."
Yeah.
You know, but it was there.
That's
like, I'm
part
not
of the
going to say
story.
it wasn't there. You know, that I'm supposed to be an honest person here.
And they're doing that so that your metal detector doesn't work, right? Like you're picking. Is that to
that's
kind
right.
of cover?
To put off the metal detector.
Yeah. So basically, you can't find the thing, and you can't find the needle in the haystack because it all pings, right?
That's
Well,
right.
we heard the same thing about that book, The Long Walk, when he sees the family of Yeti when he's trying to get out of Siberia, going through Siberia, and
Where's this going?
well, it's just the idea. The editor told him take it out, take it out of the book, and because you don't want to, you're telling this story about how you escaped a prison camp. You don't want to be talking about a family of Yeti that you saw on the way home. You know that. Let's cut that out of the book. But I think that there's a part of every author. It does not have to be objective to the truth. I have to say what happened.
That's right. You have to.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really important.
This sort of observation then.
Yeah, you're there. You're seeing it.
And
You're holding it.
Do you have to dig? How far are you going? 10 feet down? 6 feet down? How far down do you go to find these pieces?
So Gary goes down, it looks like 3 feet down.
3 feet down.
So he spends almost all day at this one rock because Tyler had configured the metal detectors to identify this stuff.
Interesting.
You know, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
What kind of metal is it?
We don't know. Well, they're anomalous. So according to Gary, who then comes back and says to us months later, you know, I've done the initial look at these and they're so far
But it's setting off the
anomalous.
metal detector.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's looking for a certain type of metal, I guess.
Yeah.
And knows what it is.
It's like an alloy, probably.
And I don't know, as a non-scientist.
Is it light? Is it
The metal?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's super light. It's super light.
It's
And it's...
What's the biggest piece that you guys found?
So probably the biggest piece was probably like this big.
Size of a Subway sandwich?
Yeah.
like bigger than a VHS.
Yeah, bigger than a VHS. And then we found a bunch of small parts, and there were some other types of things too.
A couple questions. What other type of things did you find out there besides, was it pieces of some other stuff?
Yeah, no, it was apparently part of it, but it didn't look like the frog skin.
So
It
you're
looked
saying
like something
frog skin,
different.
you're saying it's wavy, it's got texture, or it just shines that way?
It's wavy. It has texture like bumpy, you know, like frog skin has. And like if you took a frog and you took his skin off, that's what it would look like. But it was metal looking and kind of dark metal.
When did you do this again?
This was in, let's see, probably 2017.
Wow, so pretty recent.
Yes.
It's still out there.
And that busts your paradigm, right? Because you're at this point, you said you weren't really a believer. You were just sort of chasing this narrative.
Then you're
like, I'm holding this.
I knew that there was something there that was substantial, but I didn't believe it was what I was going to find out.
Right.
And also part of it was the context, was that Tyler was bizarre. Like he could go, he didn't have to go through TSA at the airport. You know, I mean, so many weird things about that guy. And so he told us what would happen to Gary once he got through the airport. So we had to take this stuff back, right?
Yeah.
And so I say, I'm not taking it. You know,
Put it
I'm
in
not
your
going to
bag,
take
Gary.
this. Yeah, I did. I said, you take it, Gary.
Give
You're
it to
going to
Tyler
analyze
Durden
it.
and let him take it through here.
Yeah. And so Gary's like, I'll take it. I'll take it in my backpack. So Tyler said, okay, this is going to happen to you, Gary. You're going to get stopped. And don't worry, though, you'll get it. They're not going to, even if they find it, they're not going to know what it is and they don't care. But whatever, it's going to be tagged and flagged. And so you'll probably be known. And Gary's like, I don't care about that. And so, but he was sweating when he went through the airport.
Really?
Yeah, it all happened.
And they stopped
it
him
all
the same
happened
way?
exactly. So Tyler sailed through. I go through TSA. Gary goes through TSA, gets stopped, you know. And I'm watching and I'm afraid for him, frankly.
Yeah.
And then I get out and Tyler's just hanging out there with his glass of water.
And Tyler has some of the craft and Gary has some of the
Gary
craft.
has all
of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why wouldn't Tyler carry it if he could just go through TSA? He didn't.
I have no idea.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Because if he just breezes through, just take it with you, pal. Put it in your laptop bag.
And you spent just one day digging for this stuff?
Yeah.
And you found
the
all
whole
of that.
day.
What is Gary?
Yeah.
What is Gary's conclusions then once he gets it back to the lab?
So again, he at this point, and I checked this before I went on the Joe Rogan podcast. I checked it with Gary, so I texted him and say, "Okay, I'm going to go on Joe Rogan. What can't I say or can I say about this stuff that you found?" And he said, he just said it was anomalous, and he said that we found anomalous that of his stuff. He found anomalous stuff that's been found at a place where people have seen a craft. So are they related? He can't say.
Sure.
Right? But
it's a very scientific answer. Like something we can't explain that was found at a place purportedly where there was associated with a crash.
Exactly,
any serial numbers on there or any writing or anything?
No, nothing.
And why
like
do you
that.
think they crash?
Yeah, so that's a question. So some people have this theory, and this is what Gary's theory is that, and this is what Tyler's theory is too, is that it's a donation, like they're giving it to us. And so how do they do that? They can crash. Well, to me, that seems strange, but that's their idea, that it's a donation. Could this be, so you have to assess all of these different theories. Could this be a government psyop that I'm a part of and now, sadly being duped? I'm a useful idiot, sadly being duped into saying this for people. Well, in my book, I say, I don't know, maybe. Right. Yeah. But I'm being really honest. In my book, American Cosmic, I'm still skeptical. I'm not a believer or a disbeliever. But what happens afterwards makes me a complete believer that there's another level to this, and that there are forces of evil and good here at work.
Yeah.
And so now that's what I believe.
Maybe the angels' wives just didn't put any oil in the
craft.
Yeah, they let them drive it, or maybe they just let their wives drive, their human wives drive. That would be.
They would have crashed.
They would have crashed. That's the whole point. No,
I think it's hard for people to think that this thing is an advanced piece of technology that doesn't have any fuel. Really, it's anti-gravity. It's going, speeds we don't even know, 20,000 miles an hour, and then it just crashes.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And but I think that's it's like anything. It's just one miscalculation or one issue, or it's always associated with. Someone said that we brought on a gentleman who was there in the 60s in the nuclear base, and there was this theory that our nuclear technology messes with their technology, can shut them off, can cause them to lose power almost, and then they crash. And if these things are nuclear and they're causing, human beings to have almost radiation issues, then Robert Salas.
Robert Salas.
Robert Salas. Yeah.
And so if they're nuclear and our nuclear issues cause their problems and they crash because of maybe some sort of bomb that we set off in the atmosphere, and it causes them to lose power and then they go down. But also we're saying that they have sort of,
Well, I was going to ask about another idea with this, not necessarily that they're crashed, but that you said they're donated. And I wonder if any of your research, whether it be the oral tradition or talking to Tyler, or some of this invisible college stuff, have you uncovered anything that would suggest that we have maybe an agreement or an accord with some of these extraterrestrials, if you will? Like, because people talk about the Eisenhower Accord. There's this idea that he went for emergency dental work, but he didn't really do that. He went to Los Alamos, and there was this. Well, it sounds like it will say donation. It's interesting. It's like that. You donate something, is it goodwill, or do we have some kind of agreement? And there's been hypothesized things on our show about the abduction phenomenon, and that perhaps there's an agreement where there's a trade for technology. This is, of course, someone's opinion or their hypothesis, that we've traded technology for permission to abduct humans.
Yeah, like have presidents met with aliens.
Yeah, I know that one.
Yeah,
I know
have you found anything that would make you think that maybe that's happening, or is that just sort of a lot of conjecture?
I have not found anything to suggest that. In terms of me talking to the people who are associated with those programs, who actually maybe have seen the phenomena around nuclear sites and even weapons and stuff like that. What I do think, though, is that this is real about the nuclear power, because think of where the crash sites happen. They happen after the Manhattan Project, right? Over in, where we're detonating,
A lot of New Mexico, right? A lot of that area
yeah.
where-
So it's right there.
Yeah.
And so there's something there that and the question I got a lot from Tyler was, why do they care so much about our weapons of mass destruction?
Exactly. They're always associated with them, and they're turning them off.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of those videos where the Chinese are shooting down those drones with those like big guns because people can't illegally fly drones. And it's like maybe our nukes just turn them off and then they just free fall and they're like, and then they do crash. Something like that. Something we're doing is causing that, and it's such a wild.
Or it could just be ambivalence. I mean, it could be that, because we had Gary Stearman, a gentleman on our show who has this UFO experience where his plane is going to go down. He's flying his plane, and a UFO shows up on his wing, and more or less saves him. He has a time slippage, which is wild. But this dude's a Christian guy who changed his entire life. But this UFO saved his plane. It basically took control and took it in, and he landed in a situation where he shouldn't have.
He told that story
would have gone down. He tells the
Mm-hmm.
story. So then you have these anecdotal things where you go, there's a lot of evil stuff that happens. I think the abduction phenomenon is super evil. We talk about demonic. It's evil, and you have a lot of associations with UFOs as negative, quote, evil stuff. But then you also have this other side, and Nate kind of touched on it, where you have things that kind of don't make sense, like they're helping. Or we go back to Francis of Assisi, and you go, you have an encounter with something that, like you said, maybe it was a byproduct of the encounter was his injuries, but he's in prayer. Is this a positive? Like the good guys are also using technology, and that's what I was going to say. Into that conversation is, when you were going through the archival stuff, and this I think fits the conversation as well. And you're seeing similar injuries. Is that, we almost got there, but is that the same thing that Gary's seeing? Are you able to look through and find these more ancient UFO encounters and say, we have a modern day reciprocal of that, and this feels a lot like someone having an encounter with technology, like a craft that's purportedly reported as an angelic or a seraph encounter, but it mimics the earmarks of someone having an encounter with radiation technology.
Yeah, it could just be a different interpretation.
Sure.
The same phenomena.
Right.
I mean, it just seems so similar.
Right. Well, I think you made a great point. Like we've got this, and we talk about this in the show. We have this. Sometimes we inherit this medieval understanding of angels and the super. Like we look at the work of Da Vinci and these things, and there's these cherubs, there's babies, and that becomes sort of our unconscious understanding of a very real realm. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, it does. And so when you actually encounter that realm in real life,
it doesn't.
No, you're like, what the heck is that?
Yeah, it doesn't.
Right?
It doesn't make sense because you're expecting someone with a winged thing, a thing with wings and halos to show up, and a craft shows up.
Right.
Right, instead.
That's right.
And
Teresa of Avila had the same experience, and this was in the 1500s. Okay. And this is in Spain. And so and by the way, this gets redacted. So this totally, the Catholic Church redacts it because it doesn't fit into their theology.
Tell us that story.
Okay, so she is a nun, and a very intelligent woman, can read and write and does all these amazing things. And she is just, having a normal day when something shows up near her that's on her left side, and it's small. And it's about 3 feet tall, and it's all fiery on shiny. And she thinks in her head, because she actually writes about it herself, she gives her own report. She says, I think this might be an angel, but I've never seen an angel that looks like this. Another thing is that it is short. And another thing is that it has a dart. It has this dart that has fire at the end of it. Okay? And then it actually examines her, kind of like what you see in John Mack.
Yeah.
It does this, it goes into her entrails. Okay. And so she says, and it was a weird experience, like, she's ambivalent about it. She says, it's both ecstatic and horrifying. Yeah. So she says this, and she says it's real. It's not imagination. And later Catholic redactors change it to, this couldn't have happened because angels don't show up this way.
Yeah.
So it's great that we have her own experience. And by the way, this is also like that. It's one of the most represented angel contact events in history.
Really?
Yeah, it's called Teresa of Avila's ecstasy. And Bernini made a statue about it that paints that being like a cherub.
Like a little child.
Yeah, so we think that it's this cute little cherub thing. That comes from, by the way, Greek culture and Roman culture. That's Eros.
Eros, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a pre-Christian.
They're borrowing imagery.
It's an image, yeah.
How many different factions of these alien angels do you think there are? Because, I mean, on our show, we've heard the insectolins, which look like these praying mantis things that are down underground.
Grays.
The grays, the talls and the short ones, 3-foot ones, 2-foot ones, and then the 8-foot ones that are supposedly...
Like the Nordic.
Someone saw that in Vegas. The Nordics, these tall Palladian blonde ones. And then you have, you know, big-eyed version of the grays. And then angelic beings, you said seraph. Yeah, I mean... What are your thoughts on that? Because I think some people are just easy to lump it all into one. Aliens, well, what? Just like an angel. What kind of angel? There's many different types of angels.
Yeah, so there are taxonomy of angels, right?
Sure.
So the medieval scholastics had this, and you know, the thing is that they're kind of like mathematicians, right, or scientists who are trying to understand quantum theory. Like they pose some. This is our theory now. And it changes with time because they approximate it because they're trying to get this model of reality, but they don't know the reality intimately. They can't say what it is, so they approximate it, and then they have this theory about it. I think that those taxonomies are theories about these beings. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the reality that they exist. Yeah. And so for me to like try to make a taxonomy, I'm not there. I can't do it. I can only accept that there are many different ones because it appears that, you know, people talk about different ones, and there's so many of these stories. But I don't know like how many.
Yeah. I think that's, we didn't even talk about the reptilians, which sounds like the UFO wreckage. Maybe the reptilian was flying around the frog-skinned one.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? That's what people have said to me. Like, you keep saying that reptilian stuff, and I'm like, oh.
So
hey, people wrap their cars. Yeah. You see the bros. Maybe the reptilians just wrap their UFOs and just cruise.
Yeah, I mean, I can't deny that that's what we found, right?
But that is a wild story. I mean, you actually went there and picked up. Not many ufologists. I mean, I think that would be like the Bigfoot event for all the cryptid seekers. You picked up and you held UFO wreckage.
That's what Tyler said to me. Tyler said, because I picked it up and looked at it, and Tyler was like, wow, your reaction is so odd. And I was like, odd? And he goes, don't you get it? This is historical. What you're holding is historical.
Yeah.
And I was like,
where is it now?
I don't know. I think it's with Gary, but I don't. Honestly, I don't know where he keeps it. I know that Stanford supports Gary, which is great.
Supposedly, the guy that we interviewed that had the wreckage went on a radio show, old school radio show, and then disappeared quickly after that.
What?
Yeah, they took him out. And there's pictures of this guy. Like, he sent us photos of this trapper, a government trapper. He's sitting there by his government
Pretty robust
truck.
gentleman.
And then he went on a radio show and it's gone.
He's gone.
Yeah, that was the backstory of that. So I don't think that this is like something that people want circulating in the population. Just chunks
of course.
I've got a question. Like, so looking forward, right? Your new book is Encounters, and you're talking about the sort of we're on the cusp, right? What in light of also what's happening today in the halls of Congress, like where do you see happening next? Like, do you think that we have like a disclosure or a contact event? Do you think this thing is going to still slowly, even for show, leak out, or what do you think happens next? Because you're really on the forefront of the research part of compiling everything that's happening, and we are really in a unique time as you held pieces of purported wreckage of a UFO, right? These things are the biggest things that's happened to humanity in the modern era, as far as our post-academic sort of era, right? Like I think the idea of the interaction between angels and humans in the Old Testament was much more of a commonplace. I mean, not made commonplace, but just understood. It wasn't weird. But we've kind of jumped the shark across the Rubicon, if you will.
Or maybe we're still having them. We just don't write it down the same way.
It could be.
But what do you think happen? What do you think happens next?
The future?
Yeah, like in the next few years with all of this.
Yeah. Okay. So just a quick anecdote about me writing this paper that's taken me 2 years to write. Okay. So it's an encyclopedia entry for Oxford Encyclopedia on, they named it, not me, they named it Aliens and UFOs. Okay. And it's, how do you do that? So it's good. Those are usually small entries, but it's huge because I had to. I solicited the help of all these scientists who've been doing this for the last 40 years or more. And I cite them. Okay, so I want to give credit where credit should be due, right? To the whole history in the United States, at least, of this. I do try to include Australia and some other places too.
So a lot of this is coming from the Invisible College.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the thing is that, so I write it and I send it in, and this is like 2 years ago almost, and it goes through peer review. And what happens is it goes to most likely members of like the Galileo Project and, those guys, right? And so they say that, or affiliated, not Avi Loeb himself, but affiliated with that. And they're physicists and astronomers, right? And they know this topic. But they told me not to use these names of several of the people that I named, because those weren't credible scientists. Now, I know for a fact that those scientists that they say are not credible have been paid by our government. They brief our government on this topic. Yeah. So that shows you how behind academics are on this topic.
They're paid experts for our government.
So how can these people who you may not know who they are, but their work is legit and they actually work for your government and they're paid experts on this topic, and I'm citing them. Right. And so that was uncomfortable. That was an uncomfortable situation that I had to deal with, and it looks like it's going to be published.
Okay, let's go.
But I did have to rearrange some things,
I bet.
So that happened. So so academia, sadly, is probably not at the forefront here.
Well, yeah.
of what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I mean, from the beginning of our show, when we brought the Bigfoot scientist on, and he was kind of making it sound like if I wasn't a tenured professor, I would have been booted out of here because I was a laughing stock of the college. Other professors making fun of me and putting Bigfoot statues around and teasing me because of my work. But I mean, the idea is like, if your work is good, it's going to cause some controversy.
That's true. That's what you have to embrace when you do this work.
Yeah. So someone who works in religious studies, because the way that information is disseminated now, do you think we'll have a disclosure event where our government will disclose? I don't necessarily think that it's going to be the truth per se, but because you talked about this oral narrative. So you really have these two things. You have what the public is fed or leaked or conditioned through Hollywood, et cetera, and what we're told or gets out. And then you have this meta narrative of what's actually happening. Do you think we reach a disclosure point where the government says, okay, got us. We've got
kind of like an Osama bin Laden, like we got him. Right. And then you talk to people behind the scenes and they're like, there's way more to this.
Yeah.
Is it kind of one of those things?
That's right. Yes. So the thing is that the whistleblowers, who are wonderful people and happy that they're doing that, they're always secondhand knowledge. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm a person with firsthand knowledge. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And so they're going to keep putting whistleblowers that are safe up there in Congress as a show. Like, this is what people are going to accept. On the other hand, the people that actually do know something, they're going to use tactics that are harassing to try to get information from us. Thankfully, all my stuff is out there published. So, but I have had lots of
You're like Bob Lazar. Like you're so public, it's safe, right? In a way. Like I feel like Bob did that. Like he came out and I think his whole thing was, if you hide in the public, in the center of the public eye, it's much harder to be disappeared or to be, than if you are, I don't know, anybody who just happens to know something and says something offhanded, right? Like it's a safe place to be as an academic, and then also because everything is published, what are they going to do? Like there's not any secret knowledge in your head.
That's right. Yeah.
We hope so, right? We all hope.
Right. So that's what I think. I don't think we're going to have that from the government, and I'm sorry to say that. I'm working with people who are working hard to do that. Yeah. But honestly, I just don't think so. Just because we've had this since the 1950s and 60s, we've had these congressional type of hearings, right, where credible witnesses come forward and talk. And even more so, we did have Ryan Graves, and he has, seen, and he has received so many reports from pilots. My friend Dr. E.O. Whiteley, the same thing. She's a pilot as well, trains pilots. So we do have these reports. They could get people up there to talk about the real
like
thing.
firsthand.
They really could, but they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it.
It's
fascinating too.
Yeah.
Do you think that like they've been communicating with us for a long time? Like it makes me think about the crop circle phenomena, and like some of those are faked, but a lot of them aren't. And are they trying to say something to us, communicate to us in some sort of way?
Yeah. So I do think that. So I think that consciousness is an access point. So I think that the early church, like, look what happened to Francis. He's up there on the screen now. So here he is. He's trying to talk to angels. He's praying on a mountain, and he's praying to God, right? And it's on the feast day of the archangels. So he's basically his mind or something in his consciousness is accessing this other realm, and they come. Right. Yeah. So I think that there is, now saying that, I think that you do not do this. You don't try to access it unless you just, because there are bad ones. And I've seen this too. So I've had so many people come to me, like thousands of people at this point, with information, reports. And so most of them are really bad. Yeah. So don't do this in your life. Right. So religious traditions have evolved constraints on how we access these realms, and listen to those. Like those are the things we shouldn't throw out. We should, we should be careful.
And this is kind of where I think I personally disagree with Joe Rogan and his ideas around psychedelics, because those experiences, and he says it, and a lot of people in this space who are in the psychedelic space say that they're having real encounters with real entities. But man, the people that of faith that get there, they'll tell you quickly that there's like a false Jesus that walks around, that there are these entities that say these things and know these things about you. But it doesn't feel like we're supposed to do that.
Yeah, I would say don't.
Yeah.
Especially because I've had people come to me with knowledge of stuff they shouldn't know about me. And I know they were bad people. Like I could tell. And so people don't have the discernment that the religious traditions suggest that you practice.
Right. There's a way to access, we have the Holy Spirit. There's a way to access God, to pray to God. Jesus showed us that in the garden, how to pray. They asked some very simple question, which is maybe it's a loaded question, but like I think it's interesting. I just think this whole conversation as we, this is what Nate and I've been doing for 4 years, is trying to unpack angels in some ways. Like, what are we actually talking about? There's a Greek word that means messenger. This is
I was just going to say that. I mean, messenger is a big part of the angels. I mean, it's their job to bring us messages.
That's right. That's right. And I think they do.
Yeah.
And I think that happens. I mean, it sounds like that person whose plane was, he was saved, his life was saved. That I would call that an angelic situation, right?
Yeah. But associating angels and UFOs, it's not a wild. Is that where you're at?
Oh, there's a direct lineage, historical lineage, because if you unpack what an angel actually looks like, that's imagery that we see and we've been brought up with. That's actually that's pre-Christian imagery, right? So that's imagery that domesticates the event, the angel contact event. And generally, even like, look at Mary, be not afraid. This is repeated over and over again in the Bible for a reason, because it's scary. It's a scary event.
Yeah.
And when it comes, when you don't ask for it and it comes and it imparts knowledge that you need from, God is sending a messenger, I believe that that's true. I believe that that's good. Okay. But I think that allow that to happen. Don't
look for it. Or summon it, right? Or whatever they try to.
Yeah, I think so. That's my, I could change my mind, but after what I've experienced, I don't think I will.
Yeah. Careful what you pray for sometimes. Yeah. You have to have that humility factor. And I think a lot of people don't. They go looking for it. And especially with these people trying to contact aliens, they're just out there on the shining lasers into the sky. Be like, come down and hang out with us.
It's like the Independence Day, the beginning of Independence Day, where they're like,
I saw that,
They're like all dance on the top of
like
boom. And then it's like,
right.
See ya.
But I think that it is a terrifying event. And you have to think about, there's probably a lot of things going on in that event, that not just a being standing there, but maybe there's an entourage of weird stuff that they've brought with them, and you're looking into. And a lot of people who are seers on our show too, often will say some bizarre stuff and see bizarre stuff. And it's hard as podcasters and hosts to know, okay, are you seeing good things? Are you seeing bad things? Are they manipulating your perception? Are they presenting you a false light? I don't know. Like, how are we supposed to make sense of these encounters? And I think that's why the Bible forbids a lot of these things.
I think so, to keep us safe. Yeah. Because we have, like, if consciousness is an access point, it's very important to keep it sovereign.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, just talking to the dead, you're not supposed to do it. It's not that you can't.
Right.
You shouldn't, and because you don't know.
And back to the medium. Back to the medium talk. Yeah. You're not supposed to. It's pretty specific. You don't do that. Yeah.
I guess one of my last questions is now, like, what if you had a conversation with yourself 12 years ago before you got into this? How would that go, and what would you, I know that's impossible to do, but I'm just trying to think of, like, where you are now versus where you were.
Yeah.
Would you look at yourself and be like, you are nuts, you're out of your mind? Or is there a part of you that this truth, this understanding is all you've always...
Yes.
You've always wanted to know the truth. And it didn't matter what it was. Yeah.
So, I had a conversion experience at 11. So I still have that Bible that I made my mother buy me after that. It's the King James Version, red letter edition. Still have that.
That's cool.
And so I asked God, and it wasn't then, it was in my 20s. I said, God, I really want to know. And then I went through training, right, to learn about the Bible and everything like that. And I think that what I would say to myself in 2012, I know what my 2012 self would say to me now. I would say, are you crazy?
Yeah.
Like, why did you do that? But looking back, I thank God, really. I thank God for it. And I also, because God has showed me, right?
Yeah.
And it was shocking, frankly. And I would say, Diana of the past, it's going to be okay. You're going to go out of your comfort zone, and it's going to be hard, and be okay with that, because in the end, today, you'll get a break. You'll get a break.
Yeah. I mean, that's cool. I mean, you start this journey, and then you actually get to hold UFO wreckage. And not many people get to do that. And I think,
early on, they probably might appreciate it a little. Might have been a little more of a mind grenade now, maybe.
Yeah. I mean,
then.
at the time, I was.
But I think it's great though, because it's so organic. Because you are still skeptical. You're not out looking for this in a sense, like chasing this down. It kind of comes to you, and you go, I don't know, and then you're holding it, and you go, maybe there's something to this.
Yeah.
I think that's incredible.
Yeah, it is. I mean, because you just don't get those opportunities. It feels like something that God would do, because I think that there are so many people, truth seekers, that are just desperately willing to sell their soul to see a Bigfoot or to get on a UFO craft, even if it's a terrible experience. They just want the tangible experience, but then it just kind of presents itself to you. And I think that's important. And, I just appreciate you being willing to share with our listeners that, because we find ourselves in a weird intersect between skeptics and believers. And I think over the years we've grown. I mean, before this show started, I mean, I was more in the Bigfoot space. Mm-hmm. And now I'm like, there's a whole other world of blurry creatures in the skies, not just in the woods.
And I also appreciate your work, because I think it's so important as Christians that we create a framework to contextualize this, right? Because I do think that things that are this out of the box, or that seem this far out of the box of mainstream church, have the potential to derail people from their faith. And I think that's why I think your work is so important, because of where you sit and what you do.
Yeah.
And because you are a professor of religion, looking at this provides framework within our faith to say our faith is big enough. Let's just looking back in the past, and we can go St. Francis of Assisi, and this weird looks like an abduction thing that happened. All these things are written down. And then we have the Bible. We can talk about Jacob, and we can talk about Abraham and the angel of the Lord doing these things, walking, talking, eating, wrestling. And perhaps, not even more perhaps, but we believe in this space that these are some of the most important conversations to have, because what's happening today in the halls of Congress, I think, without context for Christians, could be something that's just like, this disqualifies my faith.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think that's what a lot of people say, and a lot of people from the government are trying to get me to say that this is going to make people who are religious non-religious, and I'm like, no, it's not going to. It's going to do the opposite. Mm-hmm. Because look at what happened to me.
Right.
Just last thing, the thing that Francis did right was the Tau cross to Brother Leo, convert down. That's what it definitely
Wow.
said. Yeah.
Convert now.
Convert now.
That's right. Everyone out there, convert now. If you're listening to this. Yeah,
Thank
we'd love
you,
to
Diane.
tell
Yeah.
our listeners where your books are,
Yeah.
where to interact with you.
Oh,
and all
sure.
the other
Yeah, I
things.
have a website, dwpasulka.com.
Yeah.
And I also am on DW Pasulka at Twitter and Instagram at this moment. I think on LinkedIn too. And on Amazon. My books are on Amazon.
Awesome. Luke's going to send you his first reggae Christian band.
Oh yeah, exactly.
With the,
And
hit
also
song,
send it on-
with the hit song, I Saw the Seraph.
That's right.
my
That's
God.
right.
And then
I'm going
I'll-
to try that joke second time, see if it plays.
Yeah, new book is Encounters, experiences with non-human intelligences.
Very cool.
And for all our audio listeners, you can see all this stuff on our YouTube channel on the full video now. So we
Great.
appreciate you coming into the studio.
Yeah. So
hanging
happy
out.
to be here. It's such a great studio.
Yeah, we're having fun and hope you enjoy your time in Nashville.
Yeah, and just thanks for being so great. We've loved all. Yeah, just
Mutual,
our experiences
mutual,
with
yeah,
you.
yeah,
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 you've just been
yeah.
you've been amazing for showing up being here with us.
We'll have to do
especially,
another one because I feel like there's so much more information here, so many questions I
Yeah,
want
I
to
want
ask.
to get into
and-
AI and things, but we
Yeah,
didn't even
yeah.
get
But
close to
we'd
that.
love to have you at our conference also next year.
Love to come.
Okay.
Love Tennessee.
Oh, come
Let's
on
do
back.
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Diana.
All right.
Okay,
Thank
Diana.
you.
Thank you.